dear colleagues, dear professors, dear students. It's really a great pleasure to be here at the conference. I'm here for the third time. I'm not the 7 times here like Benjamin, yeah, but 3 times it's enough to feel at home and among friends. So it's really a great pleasure to be here. Today I would like to speak something about the foreign policy of the EU in the light of equality between states. And we heard from the previous panelists, and especially Professor Troceni, about whether so-called big and small countries are equal, whether they have the same competencies, whether the EU law relates to them in the same way. So I will try to explain it on the issue, on the topic of the common foreign and security policy. Well, basically, we all know that the European Union started in the 1950s, as economic integrations, but during time, this economic growth, economic strength of the European Union now has caused significant consequences to the foreign relations of the European Union. It became stronger in all fields, and by my personal opinion, it's justifiable. It is included in most of the international relations today and in the previous period. We can say the common and foreign security policy is often concerned with preventing and dealing with crises, and also as well as post-conflict peace building. I will explain it on some examples later. And this means that the agenda of the foreign policy is rather unpredictable, being strongly determined by the current international relations. Who could foresee maybe before 2 years the war in Ukraine, the conflict in the Middle East? I mean, conflict is ongoing thing, but the conflict from the last year. Almost all world's hotspots, we can say it, relate to the European Union, and European Union has its position on that. Of course, I would just say briefly about the legal basis of the common foreign security policy. Of course, it was established in 1993 as the second pillar in that 3-pillar system of the European Union in that days. And the aim was preserving peace, strengthening international security, promoting international cooperation and developing and consolidating democracy. Of course, the issue of rule of law and human rights was high on the agenda. These are 1990s, significant changes. We heard the post-Soviet era, we heard the Berlin Wall collapsed and so on. And in the 1990s, unfortunately, the Yugoslav conflict and war, and it all caused that the European Union had to change something in its international relations. After that, in 1997, the Treaty of Amsterdam just established more efficient decision-making process. Then, in 1999, the European Council established the role of the High Representative for the Common Foreign Security Policy. The Nice Treaty included some changes to the decision-making process, and so on. And now, currently, with the Treaty of Lisbon, which of course entered into force in 2009, the legal personality of the European Union is undisputable. It is an international subject. If there were some confusions before, but from the Lisbon Treaty, it's all clear. Of course, the 3-pillar structure has been eliminated, and the new common foreign and security policy actors were created, including High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, of course, being also the Vice President of the European Commission. In the Title 5 of the Treaty of the European Union, the common foreign and security policy has been regulated. It has been conceived as intergovernmental part of the EU law, and of course it has never been communitarized, so to say. With few exceptions, for example, Article 31 of the Treaty on the European Union, the member states decide unanimously concerning foreign policy issues and the Union's line on foreign and security policy. They are the executive power in the common foreign security policy, and it is accomplished through the decision of the Foreign Affairs Council, which means meets once a month, so on. The Lisbon Treaty didn't change anything about the intergovernmental character of this part of the Union's policy. For example, we can see that in the authorizations of the Commission. For example, it doesn't have, in that sense, the right of initiative or has significant executive powers. However, the High Representative is Vice President of the Commission, and now it is strongly connected. For example, also Professor Trocini mentioned something about, not something, but that the European Parliament needs to have or will have more powers, and that it should create and should influence more the European Union policy. I'm also on that standing because it's directly elected and so on, and its position about foreign policy of the EU has been enhanced. For example, High Representative must ensure that the views of the European Parliament are duly taken into consideration, and twice a year European Parliament held a debate on progress in implementing foreign security policy. The decisions, as I said, of the adopted in this part of the EU law are in principle not subject to the review of the European Court of Justice, which also indicates to the non-legal, more political aspect of this European Union policy. Of course, I will give some examples later, but the foreign policy is not limited in geographical means. It is governed by the values of democracy, rule of law, and I will just quote in the Article 21 of the European Union, which are the goals: securing, promoting, and safeguarding the Union's values, fundamental interests, security, independence, and integrity. Then preserving peace, preventing conflicts, and strengthening international security in accordance with the United Nations Charter, Helsinki Final Act, and the Charter of Paris. If you all remember the beginnings in 1950s, nobody mentioned preserving international peace. For that we have United Nations Security Council. However, in 2009, that has changed significantly. Then the goal, one of the aims, is fostering sustainable economic, social, and environmental development, as well as eradicating poverty. Again, a new goal. Encouraging the integration of all countries into the world economy and the progressive abolition of restrictions on international trade. You all are aware that some other organization is maybe more invoked in this question. Helping develop international measures to preserve the environment and to manage natural resources in a sustainable way in order to ensure sustainable development. Then disaster assistance and promoting an international system based on multilateral cooperation and good global governance. These are the goals listed, and we will see whether it is possible to achieve or this is just a list of good wishes. A diplomatic service has been created, European External Action Service, in order to, if I can say, conduct and manage international relations. It helps High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy. It does not propose or implement policy on its own aim, but it prepares acts to be adopted by the High Representative, European Commission, or the Council. Of course, now we have a lot of bodies in the EU which are in charge for the foreign policy, not only, as I say, High Representative, Parliament I mentioned, of course, Commission in one part, of course, European Council, although we heard a little bit before that European Council, of course, makes some kind of compromise, but it's a significant body for defining foreign policy of the EU. So that service is working in cooperation with diplomatic services of member states, and it comprises officials from relevant departments of the Council and the Commission, and the organization and functioning of the European External Action Service is established by the decision of the Council. One maybe interesting fact is that the first delegation of this new service was sent to the Washington, D.C. with a new ambassador of the EU, which is not maybe strange because EU and the United States have very close economic and also political relations. So I would like now maybe to emphasize and to give some examples of some foreign or actions of the European Union on the foreign affairs arena. For example, regarding the counter-terrorism efforts, We all know the fight against terrorism is an international issue, which is governed by most of the states and international organizations. For example, the European Union gives the lists of the groups or entities which are controlled or directly or indirectly by persons who commit or attempt to commit terrorist acts and declare them as terrorists. Definition of terrorism is given in a common position in 2001. The list of terrorist organizations has been published, and we all know, and today it was mentioned also the case of Yusuf and Kadi, also related to the Security Council resolution regarding the 9/11 terrorist attack. So European Union has, by my personal opinion, significant influence, significant part in the fight against terrorism. Besides that, the European Union is struggling and reaching important positions in other international organizations. For example, in the European Union, for example, in the field of providing aid for places and persons in need. In the United Nations, of course, European Union are represented not only by its own members. All members of the EU are members of the United Nations, but also EU has significant part. In the groups G20, also it has the right of membership, G8 or G7. Besides that, it hosts sometimes summit meetings. It is also in the World Trade Organization, where the EU is a member, but also 27 member states are also represented, and the EU is represented by a trade commissioner, of course, and has significant influence. And we saw in the Article 21 of the Treaty on the European Union that the goal is to enable international trade. I would like now to say something about different crises or hotspots today in the world. For example, not in details, but maybe we will have time for discussion. For example, regarding the war in Ukraine, the European Union has acted more or less unanimously. Also, all the member states in the European Union have imposed sanctions on Russian Federation, some other measures helping Ukraine and so on, and we cannot see publicly maybe or some different positions, although of course they can be seen in some small amount, but more or less European Union has been cohesive. But for the Palestine crisis, the case is not similar, by my personal opinion, because we have some states in the European Union that recognize Palestine as a state, and the others are still mentioning Palestine as an entity. Some of the EU member states have recently recognized Palestine. Of course, it affects in some way their relations with Israel, but that's also one of the elements of the foreign policy that is maybe not coherent totally coherent. Also, that is the question regarding the recognition of the so-called Kosovo, because 5 states of the European Union does not recognize so-called Kosovo as a country. So basically this does not affect the internal position of the European Union, the international cooperation, but in some international aspects there can be seen some differences. For the end, I would like to mention the enlargement process, which is of course part of the, in general, foreign policy. But if we can remember, or you read about it, about 1990s, about the war in Yugoslavia, the European Union and communities before were accused that they did not act properly in time, and that the situation could be in some way avoided, or the war in the ex-Yugoslavia could be avoided. However, after that, the European Union has started intensive process of negotiating with the new members for the candidate members. Of course, we know that most of the countries of Eastern Europe and Central Europe were accepted in the EU 20 years ago, exactly, right, 2004, and others were admitted later, Bulgaria, Romania, and Croatia. Now, currently we have 6 candidate countries which have started negotiations and 2 that have not started negotiations in Eastern Europe, in Ukraine, Georgia, and so on. By my personal opinion, not because coming from Serbia, by my personal opinion, it is the far most important international issue of the European Union in order to attract, to accept new states, new countries into the European Union. It will, by my personal opinion, help to preserve peace or restore peace, international peace and security, to enhance rule of law and human rights issues. Of course, that has been supported extremely by the Council of Europe and the European Court of Human Rights, but that role of the European Union as their foreign policy aim is also very significant, by my personal opinion. So for the end, as a conclusion, I would like to say that the foreign policy of the EU, although not envisaged in the beginning as an important part of that organization, is now becoming one. The world is changing very fast. The hotspots, the crises are present. They are here. Economic power of the EU cannot allow European Union to stay aside from all these happenings. I think that the European Union has performed good reforms and introduced new organs, new bodies, new policies. Now it's just the question of the unity in the European Union, the question whether there will be some other sounds. We heard them in the European Union, but they were managed in a good way so far, but we will see. My personal opinion is that equality of states should be obeyed also in the foreign and security policy, not only in the internal affairs of the European Union. However, I'm not sure if that is possible, especially referring to Professor Tročeny's comments on the relations between, from one side, Germany, France, Italy, and other countries. But that is something to be debated in the future. Thank you for your attention.